Good afternoon. I am Dr. Brent Turvey, and once again, I'm here with my colleague, Melanie, a forensic investigator. We are going to talk this week on The Hard Truth about crime scene staging. And this is it's a controversial topic, but only when people are doing it right. When it's not controversial at all, as long as people are ignoring things and doing things wrong. So, exactly. So first, that's a little too accurate, right?
It's extremely accurate. I love it.
Well, it's the hard truth. What am I going to say? The truth. It's not the easy truth. It's the hard truth.
The hard
truth is people like to talk about staged crime scenes when it goes after somebody that they don't like. When it goes after somebody they like, they don't like it at all, just like anything else. So let's talk about what crime scene staging is. So a staged crime scene, this is a term that refers to a crime scene that has been manipulated or altered to make it appear as though something happened other than what actually happened, to hamper or deter law enforcement investigations, or either to slow it down, to keep it from bearing fruit, to keep it from leading to natural suspects, or to keep it from being resolved at all. An example, a very common example, is taking a homicide. Someone has been killed by someone else, and the person who commits the homicide then stages the crime scene, rearranges the evidence, removes evidence, adds evidence, changes evidence, so that it appears as though it might be a suicide. There's a lot of ways this can be done. I have a lot of experience working these kinds of cases, but the reality is that it is not something that's that uncommon. People think it's uncommon because most of the people who are responding to crime scenes or responding to reports of crime or death, they're responding based on what they've been told by 911. I have a great friend named Ron Miller. He's a former student of Paul Kirk, the forensic scientist we talked about before. The father of sort of forensic science in the United States. And he said to me, most homicide or most crimes are solved by 911. 911 gets a report of a call from somebody and they say, oh, my wife killed himself, or my husband, he had an accident or something like that. And that becomes the mindset. And there's no real investigation. There's no real checking things out. They just go there thinking it's one thing, and then they don't try to see if it's something else. An investigation into a death is not automatic. This is why there are protocols. There are protocols set in place that require that every sort of crime scene get treated like a potential homicide. Every death scene gets treated like a potential homicide. So let's talk about where this idea came from. How long has this idea been around? It's been around for hundreds of years. It's been around just as long as there's been false reporting. So for the biblical people in the room who like biblical references, and I'm pretty critical of religion, but I hope to assuage the fears of people by letting them know that I am Bible literate. So my criticism doesn't come from nowhere. One of the earliest cases involving staged crime scenes and false reporting is the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife, where he is accused Joseph is accused of essentially sexually assaulting the Pharaoh's wife, and she allows him to spill his seed, and she has a blanket, and she uses this to confront her husband with evidence that there's been an attempted sexual assault. That's staging. She's trying to create this illusion by manipulating the evidence or altering the evidence or adding evidence in with a report. So it's a false report, and she staged the crime scene to mimic or staged the scene to make it look like a crime had occurred. And her husband believed him and threw Joseph into a hole. So, didn't work. It worked out well for Joseph eventually, but not at that moment. So anyway, this idea has been around a long time, and in the literature, and I'm going to be very clear here. And Melanie, I know that you have heard me say this before, but I need to remind everybody, I'm very white, and since I was raised in a sort of in the shadow of white European literature, most of the references that I'm familiar with are English, and I don't know the other literature. I know the European literature, and I know this literature in the United States, and if it's been translated into English, I know it. But because I know that there's other literature out there, the caveat I'll make is the literature that I have access to because of my abilities and my language constraints. Essentially, I've been able to research it back to Hans Gross, his publication, Criminal Investigation. And he talks about the importance of when you get a statement or when you get a complaint, the importance of doing a crime scene investigation that considers the defects of the situation. And the only way you can identify the defects of the situation is by reconstructing the crime and then writing out your findings. And he talks about this as a very important feature of crime scene staging. But I also want to mention something else. When I'm on the stand, I get asked this all the time. When I'm working on a case and I'm alleging in the case, or I'm showing in the case how the crime scene was staged, or the scene itself was staged to look like one thing, it was actually another. I get asked, how many cases of staging have you worked? As though that's a real question. This is a very ignorant question. It's like asking, how many cases have you worked where there's evidence? So, because in every single case that you work on, you have to consider as a possibility the potential of a false report or the potential of staging. Every single case. You cannot go into a case and not have these possibilities lurking in the background as things that you need to eliminate potentially. So in every single case, I approach it as though it may be a false report or it may be a staging case. So this idea that, oh, it's about, the lawyers like to do that. They like to talk about numbers. They like to talk about wins and losses and whether the jury likes you or not. They live in this very fantasy world created by movies and television and their own idea of their own ego about what it is that needs to be proven or disproven about you that makes you an expert or not an expert. Because they don't want you, if you're working in a case like this and you're testifying, the opposing counsel does not want you to be an expert. So they will simply attack anything they can and find any question they can that will make it appear as though you have less experience or less knowledge or less ability than you do. And so this is a very common question. And the answer is, if you are not considering staging as a possibility in every single case, then you shouldn't even be working on cases. That's how I view it. Let me see here. There is an extensive amount of literature on this subject, but not like you'd think. You have to go looking for it. Early on, ever since Gross, nobody really did anything with the concept of staging until much later, until like the early 80s. And it was in Vernon Gebert's book, and then Vernon Gebert's book, Practical Homicide Investigation. Then he also wrote an article. It's funny because in those articles, he's self-referential. In the article he wrote about crime scene staging, he references his book. And in the book, he references his article as learned treatise. And he does this to avoid, because Gebert is a complete egotistical maniac. He does this so that he can avoid suggesting that the idea for staging came from anyone but himself. Gebert believes he came up with the idea. The problem is he directly references material and language and concepts that come from Hans Gross without referencing it. It is purely, it's essentially intellectual plagiarism. It's so bad. And a lot of people have done this over the years with Hans Gross. They read him and then they use his stuff and they don't reference him because they want people to think that they're the one who came up with the idea. Gebert is not the one who came up with the idea. Not only did he not come up with it, he didn't do anything with it. He just referenced it as a notion or thing to be looked at. And then it didn't evolve. It didn't grow. It didn't get better. So realizing these limitations, I published the first actual scientific review of an empirical review of staging cases. And this was published in 2000. And I found that in the two key findings I found that were very interesting. One is 99% of the cases that we reviewed involved someone staging the crime scene to make it look like someone else committed the crime because they were directly associated with the crime scene. What this means is the only time you take that effort to stage the crime scene, to make it look like somebody else, is because you can't move the body or the killing itself indicates you as a suspect immediately. So either the crime scene automatically infers your involvement or your involvement is automatically assumed for some reason because of your history or connection to this person. So you have to stage it to make it look like anything else happened. All right, that's the first thing. Second thing is 25% of the staging cases that we studied were law enforcement officers. Law enforcement has this idea that they can stage crime scenes better than anybody else, or that but really what's going on is they know how bad the investigation is going to be, so they know how to leave the breadcrumbs in the right place to lead their fellow officers away from the trail of a homicide or away from the trail of their own murder of a spouse or a girlfriend or something. A common theme was, I accidentally killed her while I was cleaning my gun. That's a common one. Or staging it as a stranger burglary, where the number one thing for staging a crime scene as a stranger burglary is opening a window. That's it. They just open the window and they say, they must have gotten through the window. Because if it's locked and it's not open, there's no way a stranger gets in.
Right. I want to just, can I interject for 1 second?
I need you to.
The first point that you made, I'd like to maybe just touch on something else that we've been talking about that you and I are familiar with, but maybe other people are not familiar with. But when there is a death that could be embarrassing to the family. So there is this time when, say, somebody had committed suicide and it's in such a manner that may affect the people who find them are closely related, or their family or their friends, and it may affect their um, reputation or what people are going to say about them, such as we were talking about, like sexual asphyxiation when using it to pleasure oneself, and they end up, ending their own life, and a family member comes in to find them like that. So they may move things around. They may take them down. They may remove the belt or something that's around their neck, but something that looks very closely to staging, but is just another aspect of
Yep.
why crime scenes may be moved around as well.
Yep. An autoerotic death is a very common, that's the finding you're talking about. Autoerotic death. It's very important to know that when family members encounter these things, they are happy to move things around. They are happy to go in and take things. They either take things out of the scene, like you said, that are embarrassing, or they add things to the scene to make it look like something else. And that's not an uncommon thing at all. We have to be able to see past that. That's the thing that I think that gets lost in translation here, is that we have this obligation to actually do the investigation. We have this obligation to actually make sure that we're collecting all the evidence and doing the actual reconstruction, and not go in thinking that we know what happened because we heard a 911 call or because a client told us, So I appreciate that input. We're going to get to that in a second. I think it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot. It's very interesting. It shouldn't be a controversial topic, but it is, right? Because what you have to acknowledge is law enforcement aren't trained to look at to determine whether crime scenes are staged. And law enforcement essentially are the ones responding. And we are pretty tough on law enforcement here in this group, in this podcast, in the work that we do. But the reality is, it's because they're the only ones who have the authority and the resources to respond to crimes, reports of crime, and do the investigation. And when they don't, and they ban everyone else from doing it to hide their own ineptitude, that's the problem. So my answer to any critics would be, if you don't want me to be critical of law enforcement, then give that job over to someone else who's competent.
And stop
pretending that you're competent.
That's right. And when I started the whole law enforcement journey with recruitment and things like that, and doing ride-alongs, I saw this early on. What you're referencing is like the case was solved through the 911 call, because we'd get sent to a call and they'd say, well, it was a suicide. The parents said it was a suicide, and we would go into that crime scene, and that would be it. I would say, well, aren't we going to look around? Like, what are we going to do about this? Well, nothing. It was a suicide. They said. The parents told 911 operators suicide. We handle it as such. So you're not going to do anything. We're not going to conduct any sort of investigation. We're not going to look around. Nope. It's just closed. Okay.
Yeah, because the family member says something, that becomes evidence, right?
Yeah.
If a statement is evidence and it's treated on par with physical evidence. And so they can basically, they get carte blanche to ignore the physical evidence and not do a physical evidence investigation. So
and that's exactly what was done.
Yeah. Exactly. And in other countries, it's to the point, and I think it's to the point in the United States as well, I just don't think we're capable of admitting it, where most femicides, most murders of females are concealed, domestic ones are concealed as staged crime scenes. Like they'll be concealed as one case I worked on was a young girl in Mexico, and she was stabbed a bunch of times in the back, and her naked body was in the middle of the street. And they went to the boyfriend. He said, well, she's not really my girlfriend. Not really. And besides, she's a whore. So, I wouldn't, a lot of men have sex with her. None of that was true. He was his boyfriend. They lived together, and he had killed her, dumped her in the street. And you know what they called it? They ruled it a suicide. Naked body, stabbed a bunch of times in the back, middle of the street.
Stabbed in the back was a suicide.
Suicide. And it's because there's no independent review or evaluation of findings. I have worked probably 5 different terrible suicide cases that are obviously homicides in Latin America, and it is ridiculous what they are accepting. And that's why the femicide protocols had to be developed, because they were saying you got to do this in every single case or you're negligent and you could be held financially accountable. And I feel like until law enforcement gets punched enough times with lawsuits, because that's the only thing they understand is money and reputation. They get hit enough times with that in public that's when the changes actually get made. That's when policy changes get made. And that's why law enforcement gets so upset when you talk about these cases, because it's embarrassing, and embarrassment results in political action, and political action requires a response, and it results in lawsuits, and that requires a response. And it's like remember we were talking about this, we were having a little joke between you and I about why you need to put signs on things like, don't put your hands in the blades of the lawnmower. Do not put hands in lawnmower blades while lawnmower is functioning.
The warning labels.
Warning labels. Why do things need warning labels? Because most people are incredibly stupid. They are incredibly stupid and do not think before they act. And those warning labels are there because that particular brand has been sued by somebody who has done the thing that they've asked people not to do.
Right.
And that warning label is now required because people are so dumb. I'm going to tell you right now, I have no problem saying that anymore out loud. I used to say that all the time. People are like, oh, you're being mean and you're being classist and elitist. I'm like, no, you're hanging out with the wrong people. Most people are functionally illiterate. And many of those wind up working in the justice system. And we know this because COVID. Thank you, COVID. The one silver lining of COVID, it has taught us who all the racists are, who all the misogynists are, and it has taught us who all the functionally illiterate people are. Because you can divide it up very rapidly, very rapidly between people who are taking care and people who are not taking care. People who believe it's real, people who do not believe it's real. People who are paying attention to the science, people who are not paying attention to the science. And there's lots of ways to do that that's informed. And it doesn't mean that, anti-mask, not anti-mask. It doesn't mean vax, anti-vax. I mean actually paying attention to the actual science and following guidelines from scientists.
That's right.
Instead of just making up your own.
This is
whether you're a government or not, right?
This is a conversation that can't even be brought up anymore. I'm finding we are way past the point of having any empathy for any other human being when it comes to this specific topic, whatever your view is. I don't care what side you're on, but being able to see the perspective of somebody else it ceases to exist. I just sit quietly when people bring it up, and that's like 24 hours a day now, because that's all we talk about everywhere. Anywhere you go, that's the first thing everyone wants to talk about.
Yeah, because they're mad. Most people who are mad about stuff are mad because they're not something that they like is stopped. And I get that, but there's other things going on. So the point is, we are dealing with people who are not that smart. And I think that once you understand the fact that most people are not paying attention to the science, they don't want to take the time to do they're doing their own research. It's not actual research. They actually don't understand their own protocols. They haven't read their own guidelines, their own departmental protocols. They haven't read any of the scientific literature related to staging or anything else. And they get angry when you bring it up. What's funny is this is why lawyers have rank low with me most of the time. In one courtroom one day, if it benefits them, they'll say staging is the most important thing, and you got to do it, consider it every time. And here are all the things you got to do to look at it. The same lawyer will go into another courtroom on a different day and say the exact opposite thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just
because
to make
whatever benefits them, right?
Yeah, it's whatever benefits them or their client, whether it be the state or a defendant.
Right.
And I have no time for that. I don't participate in that kind of nonsense, whether it's my client or not. So let's talk about the literature. Like I said, law enforcement is 25% of the cases that I've reviewed. The most common thing is just opening a window or unlocking a door even, but mostly it's opening a window. And then a lot of the cop ones are, my wife got shot or my husband got shot because I was cleaning a gun. Or my favorite one, I thought there was an intruder in the house. No, you fucking didn't. No, you didn't.
What about when people go through the house and just make a complete mess of it, just to look like a robbery? Is that something that's quite common as well?
It's called ransacking. When a house appears, that's one of the most common ways that a law enforcement officer can detect staging, as they say. The place appeared to be ransacked, and therefore, but it was ransacked wrong. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that, like, I had one case involving a FBI profiler who said, this is one of my favorite ones. It's California versus Jennifer and Matt Fletcher. And Jennifer's husband was killed during a home invasion. And they claim she killed him. And she's actually still sitting in prison for this crime right now. Basically, she claims that she was in the bathtub with her son, and the son was she was bathing him and all this stuff. And the people came in and shot him, and she was frightened with her naked child. And then she just waited for them to leave. FBI profiler Mark Safrick got involved. He actually did a TV episode about this for his TV show. that they had to pull because it was so full of false information because you can't get it now. Anyway, he did a TV show about it. Basically what he said was, well, first of all, I know she was lying because one, there's no dirty water in the bathtub. If you're taking a bath with a child, the water's always dirty. And I'm like, you stupid? You never, and obviously you've never had kids, so you don't know that kids take a bath just to relax. There's not a lot of dirt in it. The water's very shallow. You take it to relax, to get them ready into the mode for going to bed or taking a nap or something. There's a lot of reasons to take a bath. It had nothing to do with being dirty necessarily. No. Or it's just a quick way to clean like some shit off their face. This is what parents do, right? You've done. I'm sure. Get
off their face. It's for play. If you need to keep them contained,
all the toys are in there, right?
Bathtub and put all the toys in. Exactly.
And it cleans off the toys. I want to make that very clear. And we're not talking about dirt. I'm talking about food. The food, yes. Right? Food. Maple syrup that you were dumb enough to get on your pancakes. Oatmeal. Oh my God, that's a weird food. So anyway, that kind of insight was missing from Safford because he doesn't have kids and he doesn't have the first idea. The second thing is he said the child's bedroom was ransacked. And that is evidence of crime scene staging, he claimed. And I made him ask him, if you found out new information about what happened here, would that change your opinion? He said, absolutely. That would change my opinion. So we asked every single officer because the kid was naked, right? Mm-hmm. So I said, so this means somebody went looking for clothes. And we found the officer who said, yeah, the room was clean. I went in looking for clothes. I just pulled everything out I could. I made a big mess. Sorry. We gave him that testimony. You know what he said? Doesn't change my opinion one bit. No, that was the whole basis of his opinion, was the wrong room was ransacked.
Has he ever been in a child's room on a good day? It looks like that every day.
I don't think he understands what children are. And I don't think he understands the concept of raising children or having little children or baths or even, because the next thing he said was
clearly not.
The husband's gun, his service weapon, was in the closet across the hall, down the hall, mm-hmm. in the bedroom at the top shelf in the back of the closet was the service revolver. And he said, if it was me and my child, I would have done anything I could to get to that gun and kill those offenders. And that's also evidence of staging on his part. It's what he said. And I'm like, so you're putting yourself in the position of the victim, trying to guess what they would do and put themselves at risk. When you don't have kids and don't know what having a kid means, and you don't know what the fear that's going through the mother's head when the first thought is protect the child, protect the child, protect the child.
Right.
And plus, we've already unseated your whole finding for staging. So that didn't happen. Anyway, I use this case in training a lot. People just can't believe that he would say something like that. But that's the kind of shit that used to get said all the time when people weren't paying attention. So there is this concept of staging. There is this concept of ransacking, but you have to understand to understand what ransacking is. You have to do a lot of things. First one is find out who all the people were there, who touched what, whether it's related to medical intervention, whether it's related to search for clothing, or whether it's related to something else, some other event, or whether, like in the case we're going to talk about today, the Mullen case, mm-hmm. Right. They were claiming their house was ransacked. I'm like, how? What was searched? There was a bunch of stuff dumped on top of her, but no search was conducted anywhere because there was a bunch of files and folders and dishes and clothes everywhere covered with a layer of dust, meaning none of them were touched. But it was because the house was in such disarray, and she was clearly a hoarder,
Mm-hmm. And they made the assumption.
That's right. They made the assumption. So after I did I published my paper in 2000. We put it into a textbook. We made it a little bit better, added some case examples, and sort of to refine and develop the idea. Well, then I got the opportunity to. I've been working with Bond University for a while, and one of my interns, who was a PhD candidate at Bond, named Claire Ferguson, she decided to do her PhD on crime scene staging. I'll pull this up here so we go share screen. Where are we? Windows. Here we go. There we go. Right here. This is her page right here. This is Claire. And she decided to do her actual PhD on, and called it The Defects of the Situation, which is a direct quote from Hans Gross. And she did a typology of staged crime scenes. And she published it in 2011. However, like most people, she actually hid her PhD for a long time. It wasn't publicly accessible. A lot of people do that so they can get a job afterwards or whatever. But I didn't see a copy of it for years later. I actually assisted her. I gave her a ton of American cases. I gave her most of her data. I sat down and helped her develop the typology. And then I had to turn in her mentor for misconduct at the university. I had to turn him in because he was engaged in all kinds of misconduct, all kinds of bad things. All right. And I made a list and made a record of them. And because of that, politically, she sort of distanced herself from me. So when she published the PhD, it doesn't mention anything at all about all the data that I gave her or all the help that I gave her crafting or anything at all. It is one of the things about academia that I find so distasteful is that people get forced to take political sides instead of being honest about what's going on. So really what's interesting is her PhD on staging is staged by the removal of evidence of my involvement to make it appear as though she sort of came up with this all this data from the United States. She came up with that all herself, even though she's in Australia. All these concepts and typologies, she came up with this by herself. Must have been her genius mentor. No, because neither her mentor or her have any real experience working actual cases. They're just academics. Plain and simple. Now, that's not a bad thing. I like academics and I like academia and I like good research. But that was a real chance to do a quantum leap forward. And I read it. It fell flat on its face. It lacked any real texture, insight, or context. There's an opportunity there for all kinds of layered insight and all kinds of development. And all it is basically a literature review, an idea of a typology, and no real advancement. And it didn't actually address the problem. It's very politically safe because it doesn't actually address any of the real problems. And that's what I want to do with you today. I want to talk about some real problems and a way to reorganize and restructure the way that we think about staged crime scenes, because I think it'll help a lot. I'll be very honest. I have not given this issue the attention that I think it needs in my work. I've given it the attention in terms of considering staged crime scenes, but not in terms of developing the ideas better. So what I want you to do, Melanie, really quickly is if you could just talk to us a little bit about your experience working on these kinds of cases as part of your residency. Just talk to us about that experience, the kind of cases you worked on and the way it's changed or not changed the way you think about things.
Well, the two cases we're going to reference today, I would say that there's two definite different types of crime scene staging that I've seen in the cases we've worked. One is, like you said, it's the offender or somebody that's directly linked to the homicide that changes things around to mislead the police. And then there is the other case that we're going to discuss, which was law enforcement changing it, calling in different people that they know are going to be on their side. They have all of this ability to stage something and most of the time get away with it. Like you said, nobody's paying attention, no one's asking any questions, and it just gets swept under the rug. So there's so many layers to a staged crime scene that I was completely unaware of. Like I said, I got my first experience on a ride along. We get called there. I was told we don't do anything because the 911 operator told us this. That's what we're going to do with this. It's a suicide. We don't ask questions. But then there's so many different aspects that it's so in depth, like with the law enforcement, when it comes right down to the call itself. What happens right before the call? What the officer says to the 911 operator, who he asks to respond, and then it goes deeper into time of death. Can we call it when she's on the road so it doesn't link her, the homicide back to this point? There were so many layers of it that I had no idea existed. And I'm still just learning. There's so many more layers.
Right. Tell me how that's changed the way you do your work.
Okay, so that's changed. Before, I would have this faith, I guess, that when I get handed a case and I'm told, the basis of the case and what's happening, I had this faith that what I was being told was accurate and what I was going to see when I go into the law enforcement investigation portion of it, or the coroner report or anything like that, that it was just going to be laid out and no big surprises. But not anymore. When I get handed a case, I listen to what I'm being told, but I look at everything from a completely different lens. I look at it from the very beginning. I have to go through all those aspects, like looking for red flags of false reporting or staged crime scene or anything like that, because it's never what it seems.
That's such a great way of putting it. And I'll tell you what the shift was for me is as I started working more in Latin America and then reflect and seeing the structured, organized corruption in law enforcement here in Latin America, now taking those same metrics and applying them back to the states, the same stuff is there. And
Mm-hmm.
let me just show you what I'm talking about. We can look at, most people know about this stuff. This is not, most people who've had contact with law enforcement community understand that this stuff happens, but the rest of us ignore it because we want to believe we live in a fair and just society and we can trust the police. This is a case in Florida where you have a cop named, I think his name is Zachary. Let me check here. Yeah, his name is Zachary Wester. And he was arrested on July 10th of 2019 because he was caught on his own body cam planting drugs in multiple cases. He would take little baggies of methamphetamine and just put them onto drivers that he didn't like or that he wanted to arrest. And he was finally arrested and tried and prosecuted and convicted for that crime. He represents a constant stream of these kinds of officers. This is not some aberration that's never happened before. This is standard operating procedure for many officers or for many agencies. The next one is this one. This is a bigger one that people might remember, in case you don't think that that's a big enough deal, even though it's very common. We have a South Carolina officer charged with the murder of Walter Scott. When this happened, it was such a big deal because this was a turning point for me in realizing the value of cell phone videos and the value of social media in this regard. Basically, is in North Charleston, South Carolina, police officer essentially was chasing down a suspect named Walter Scott, and he shot him in the back. Now, there was a good citizen nearby, and I think you should go look this up if you can. There's a citizen nearby. This officer was Michael Slager. He basically said he feared for his life because the man took his stun gun after a traffic stop and then fled. None of that was true. Then when he shoots the guy in the back, he walks up to him, and he drops a gun right on him. Just drops the gun right there. Now, the reason we know this is because a good citizen was recording the whole thing with his cell phone video. So when the officer went and gave his statement and the stuff came out in the media, the good citizen sent the video in and put the video on social media so that everyone could know that he was lying. And this is not uncommon at all. So what you have to watch out for are officers with drop guns. You should, what I think, honestly, is that before any officer gets into a patrol car, they should be searched. Search for that car should be cleaned and prepared by somebody else, so there's nothing in it, no drugs, no drop guns, no toy guns, no toy things that could look like a gun, nothing like that. Because in Baltimore, they were very famous for that, for dropping toy guns on people to make it look like that they, because and that was a common thing, that you check their person for non-departmental issued guns. They shouldn't be having them. Shouldn't have any of that. Shouldn't be a problem. Any officer who's playing by the rules and is honest is going to be like, oh, thank God, I'm going to get checked by somebody. So when I go out there, I can't get this false accusation against me. Every single thing will be clean. And the ones who will complain will be the ones who are accustomed to having that safety net in case they screw up and do something, kill somebody that they just decided to kill or they shouldn't have killed, or they want to arrest and can't arrest. In my producer and my director of operations, Diana Garcia, she is the one who talked to me about what goes on in the federal police, or not federal, the local municipal police in Mexico. Officers, before they go on shift with their cars, they'll prepare several little baggies of methamphetamine or cocaine. Just prepare them and have them on their person, like in a glove or something like that. So when they're pulling somebody over and they need to arrest them or get a warrant to search something, they can drop that and say, oh, I can arrest you. I can hold you for 48 hours based on this. Now I can prepare a case and go to your home and get a warrant, go to your home and put more evidence there that I don't like, but that I will like and the courts will like, so we can arrest you. It is a mindset. So once you realize that this is a cultural thing, this is culturally what's going on. And I don't mean culturally Latin America, US, I mean culturally in the culture of law enforcement, that there are officers who do this in different agencies, essentially encourage it or turn a blind eye to it. You start to realize the kind of things that need to be put in place to make it stop. That is a very big deal. And that was the change for me back in 2015 when I kept seeing these cases that were happening.
Yeah. One other thing that I've started to implement since I've been learning all of this when I first look at a case is, before I would see the list of evidence that they've taken from the scene, you get the list and what's been tested, what hasn't been tested. And I would, again, take that just for what it was. But now I go through those lists and then I go back and I spend sometimes hours looking at the crime scene photos to see what was there, what was taken, what was left behind, and what is not missing on that list that needs to be on that list. And then start to question, why isn't it on that list? Where did it come from? Was it always there? And why is it important that it didn't go here? Or why is it now here and it's not here? So those are the things that it's just a giant puzzle for most of it to
So
try
you're
to
actually
figure out.
doing the examination. This is to
Yeah,
me,
it
once
is.
you realize what the dirt that's being done, you realize the need for doing the examination.
Right.
You actually have to do it. You can't just look at it and think you know.
No.
The way it's changed me is now for sure in every case, I want the history of every gun. I want to know exactly where it was. And I want the history of every piece of every drug, every item of drugs or every gun that's found in the scene. I want to know where it is right now. Like for example, we got a case right now with one of our clients where the case involved a drug deal that kind of went south, and there's a big bag of methamphetamine. All right. And this bag of methamphetamine was taken by the police, was never given an evidence number, and just sort of disappeared. And what we find out is it's a bag of evidence that was taken from police lockup and given to one of the witnesses in the case because he's a police informant. They're trying very hard to hide that fact from us.
Wow.
He's a police informant, and so when they collected the drugs, they put it back into evidence where it belonged.
Yeah.
So anyway, these things, once you start realizing these things are going, and by the way, that's nothing against the care. This is not besmirching law enforcement. There's an officer right now hearing this going, not all cops are like that.
Yeah, exactly.
What? We know. We all know. But you know what you're not doing? If you're not standing up and speaking out against the bad cops that you see every day doing this kind of stuff, which I know you do, and don't pretend to me you don't, doing stuff like beating their wives or flaking evidence, it's called flaking, planting evidence, flaking evidence, altering reports, going on duty drunk, going on duty wearing an adult diaper because you're drunk and you're crapping yourself all day long because you're drinking all morning to pregame so you can do your shift. If you're not taking care of that business, if you're not reporting that misconduct, if you're concealing it by omission, then don't talk to me. Don't take the moral high ground with me because I know what you're hiding. You know what I mean?
And that stuff happens. The drinking on shift happens so often. I've been in an atmosphere at a house actually where they were in law enforcement, some of them special constables, some of them constables, some of them detectives, and they were having people come over that were on shift in full uniform walking in and doing shots for 2 hours, and then they just like, oh, are these people okay with seeing this? Why are you okay with seeing that?
Yeah. Why are you okay? Why aren't you doing something exactly? Or
so of
we
course
just had a case recently
went,
where the suspect got interviewed in front of his house when the officer was clearly intoxicated. It was hilarious.
Yeah. And of course I went, I ran my mouth about that, but nothing happened.
Yeah, I think
per usual.
It's been like that for a long time, but there's been less ability to document it. And these guys are doing it in full view of their own body cams, which means impunity. They're not afraid. They're not afraid some sergeant's going to review that tape and punish them. They're not afraid that the tape is going to come to light because they fight like tooth and nail to not have body cams. And when they got them, they fight like tooth and nail to keep the body cams from becoming part of the record, which is, again, the whole purpose of having it so they can be public and protect good officers. But bad officers
we still have that issue where they decide when and where to turn it off. Fully the video or audio.
They cover it and flick it off. Or they have a little cover they can slide down. That's like in many departments, in professional police departments, your body cam's on at all times, and you turn it off. You get some punishment. There's some consequences for that. You're going to go on leave for a couple days without pay.
I've seen it off more often than I've seen a full investigation or lack thereof done with it on.
Or the pretending where they say, "Oh, we lost it." I worked
all
with
three of them at the same time.
Yeah, I remember that. All three of them turned off at the same time and they malfunctioned. That's amazing. How did that happen? So that goes to right what we're talking about. Let's talk about the sort of the typology we want to approach these cases with, because I think the time has come to start dividing up the responsibility to it. Now that we can acknowledge, because there's evidence of it, irrefutable evidence that law enforcement is doing this on a regular basis in the United States, very similar to what they've learned from their brothers in Mexico. We sort of have let's walk through it as a timeline. The first possibility for staging the crime scene, for making it look like something happened that didn't, is the law enforcement response. The law enforcement response is they come to the scene and they can decide what evidence they're going to document, what evidence they're going to search for, what evidence they're going to collect, and whether that evidence gets tested. Also, what witnesses are interviewed. You and I have worked rape cases where the outcry witness isn't even interviewed because they don't like the outcry witness. They want to interview around them and they know the outcry witness is going to tell them like, yeah, don't trust this person, they're lying to you. So they don't interview them. So they curate the record. Let me go to the case we worked on that we've talked about before is the Harrer case, where this happened with the officer. This is the case involving the young lady, the 911 dispatch operator who was dating the older detective. And he basically called in a shooting at her home and said, oh, yeah, my girlfriend just shot herself, and I want you to send these guys. I want you to send these guys, this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy to the crime scene to process it. That's what we're going to do. Here he is right here, Phil Flores. And what did they do? They took these pictures of his hands and then they hid them as much as they could with blood all over them after he said he didn't touch her. They took these pictures of him wearing these pants, but they gave him these pants and took his sweatpants that he had because they were covered with blood. So they curated the record by the response, by what they documented, how they documented it, and whether or not they released that information. But that wasn't the most important part. The most important part for me, the most chilling part, was that, how do I put this? The most chilling part for me was that they went out and announced it was a suicide before the body had just left the scene. They went out and talked to the press and said, this is a suicide. That's not law enforcement's job. So what was that? To me, that was a not so subtle message to the medical examiner. You better call this a suicide, even though all the evidence suggests the opposite. Then they spent the entire year hiding things from the family. And then the medical examiner finally, a year later, came out and said it was a suicide. Tell me your thoughts on that. I mean, I've given a lot, but I want to know what you're thinking in terms of your response to that case. What are the other things you picked up on?
This case, I think, was one of those pivotal moments for me in seeing everything. So yeah. So it was so obvious to me, even as a student where I am, the things that did not make sense, that didn't add up. And I'm looking at this, going through these pictures with you, thinking, how can this look like that if it's a suicide? None of it made it. I think I asked a million questions because I couldn't logically make sense of suicide versus what the physical evidence was telling us. So this was also point, just so everyone understands, that particular case, how long were they, how many hours were they at the crime scene before anything was actually starting to be investigated? It was hours when they got on scene before anyone even did anything.
That's right.
Right? That's right.
They all just kind of hung around and walked around and looked at stuff and went through stuff. And
yeah, and those pictures that you just showed of his hands and the outfit that he was wearing, how long it took to get those, because they were trying to hide them from you and I to see them when we're doing these reports and looking into this investigation. But
they also lied. They also lied to the family. Remember, they said, "Oh, there's a bunch of stuff on our search history and this and that." None of that was true. None of it.
And there's so many different dynamics to this case because they also really tried to push heavily into mental illness to support suicide. No matter what Flores was saying, they were pushing, medication or mental or all of these things that were not accurate. Like this case at that moment, they were not accurate, but they were just supporting that.
Practical situation where they are, other forensic scientists, other law enforcement agencies, witnesses, and family members, and the press. We're going to manipulate everybody to create this notion.
Everyone.
And what that does is it delays and lets evidence go away.
And I do think that there was a portion of not just law enforcement, the attendants, the ambulance attendants that showed up. Oh, yeah. There was some sketchy gray area there as well. I think they were all they came to a conclusion that this is what we have to make it look like. So each of us are going to play our
officer. Even though this guy, by the way, this guy had been, what he liked to do at night is he liked to go to the bars at 2:00 in the morning and then find girls that he wanted to take home and say, okay, don't worry, I'll give this lady a ride. I'm a cop. And then they'd wake up having had sex with him without knowing that's what was going to happen. So he would find drunk girls at bars, drive them home, and have sex with them under color of authority. And they like 3 of them reported sexual assault, and no criminal investigation was done. No criminal investigation was referred. They reported it directly to the police station, and they only did an internal administrative investigation and buried it in multiple cases. That
Which we
is
both know happens
common.
all the time.
Yeah, it happens way too often. This kind of shit has got to stop. And if I'm hearing one law enforcement officer tell me you're just being critical of law enforcement, no, I'm not. I'm being critical of criminals. If you're doing that kind of stuff and you're wearing a badge, you're not a cop. You're a criminal. I'm being critical of criminals, which is what you're supposed to do if you're a good cop. If you're good police, you're right. You're standing right next to me against this behavior. What you're going to then say is, oh, you're painting everyone with a broad brush. No, I'm observing that you see this behavior, and most of your fellow officers, just like you, are saying nothing and getting angry because I'm pointing it out. Go ahead and get angry. The rest of us are pretty angry too.
That's right. And to say we're painting everyone, with a broad brush, no, not at all. But we are talking about every single case that you've worked, many more. You and I are both aware of that. But even the ones that I've worked, I have the same officer, just with a different name, more than one per case, doing the same thing over and over and over. This isn't just, I saw this once and now you're all bad people. That's not at all what we're referring to here.
But also, let me just do this. If you're an officer and you're pretending that you're separate from all these other cops that are doing bad things, okay, let me ask you this. When you have a major case and you go back to the station, do you guys all sit down and write the same exact report? Yeah, you do. Your reports, you got 4 officers at the scene, exactly the same language, the same paragraph, copy pasted to all 4 reports. That's actually tampering with evidence because you're not supposed to collude.
That's one thing I didn't understand at the beginning of starting to work cases. I'm looking at all of these case files and I'm reading each investigation. Yeah. In my mind, I went, oh, I've already read this. Oh, I already read this. And it wasn't until I went back through everything, I realized it was a different officer's name and badge number at the end of those reports. Yet they were the exact same.
Yeah.
Word for word.
If you're doing that, don't pretend to me you're good police. Don't pretend to me you're honest. I'll understand that what you're doing is tampering with evidence. You're actually tampering with the record. You are filing a report that involves collusion with your other officers. What you ought to do is what you do with suspects, right? When you want to interview 4 suspects who are at the crime scene, do you put them all together and ask them what happened? No, you separate them to get separate statements because they'll say different things. That's how a police report should be. That's why I like rookies. Rookies are the best. They write these long, comprehensive reports. They don't collude. And then once they do that for 6 months, they get hammered by the sergeant. You sit down with your FTO or you sit down with your fellow officers and you get your story straight. That's what it's called. Get your story straight. In other words, everybody get on the same page, then write the report. And then just have one guy do it and he will copy paste to all 4. That's tampering. And I think we ought to start calling that out as staging. It's a prima facie evidence of law enforcement staging of a crime, as far as I'm concerned. So let's talk about the next case very quickly, since we're running out of time. The next case is the Mullen case. That's one we just worked on together. This is a case that I worked on, 22 years ago. And it came back there's multiple defendants involved. We've been able to get justice for 3 of those defendants, and there's still one sitting in jail for a crime that he clearly did not commit. And the whole case boiled down to the point of entry. They claimed that these very large Native men, at least one of them, broke in through this basement concrete window and then came up through the floor hatch and beat the woman to death and then robbed her of money. Beat and strangled her, robbed her of money. But the point is, he came through this window. The problem is, the window, underneath the window of the car, none of the leaves are disturbed. The next thing is, they're all broken from the inside. The glass that's broken in this window is in the trough, on top of the leaves. And the wood and the other panes of glass were pried out from the inside. You can see that somebody took at the middle of the night, they allege that somebody crawled down here, popped these 2 of 3 panes out, and then put them nice and neatly here, and then broke the other glass. And that glass is actually, you can see right here, first of all, the pry marks are from the inside of the window. Somebody pried those glasses out, those panes of glass out from inside the window. The next thing is you have the glass that from the broken window is on the outside. These are prima facie showings of staging or of somebody breaking the glass from the inside of the house. The same thing is true of this wood. So not only was it the wood itself that goes across the windows on the inside was pried out from the inside. This is not some complicated reconstruction. It's quite obvious. And that's the thing that I get frustrated with, because it's so obvious. And there are people approach it, even clients approach me with these things, and I have to explain it to them. And they get very angry when their whole theory of the case gets blown up because they didn't look at the evidence, or because you taught them something based on the fact that they hired you. They hired you to tell them what happened, and they don't like it because they've got their own theory. So as much as you're dealing with law enforcement who's not competent or qualified to be doing this stuff and making determinations, and as difficult as it is to explain it to juries sometimes when you have the wrong people involved, then you have the same problem with clients who are hiring you who have their own predetermined ideas of what occurred. Tell me what you learned on this case, because you and I work pretty closely together on this.
Well, I learned a lot just about the things that you were just talking about point of entry. Another thing with this case was it looked like it was, or they made it look like it was ransacked just in the portion of where she was found, because they had dumped stuff on top of her.
Yep.
This was a whole different type of case for me, because it's gone by. It's long. Like, I work cold cases, yes, but this is something where multiple people's story were sitting in prison for something that they didn't do. And we go through and start looking at this, and it was very obvious. Like the ceiling, for instance, through the floor in the ceiling, what you talked about with the nails. Yeah, and claiming that someone could fit through that little opening and then stand up and not hit one of those nails, but none of that.
Yeah, because I did it. I was there. I went to the scene. I actually climbed in. I couldn't get into the hole. I couldn't do the stuff. Then I went down to the basement. I kept hitting my head. My head was bleeding by the time I'm done, because I'm 6'1", and anybody who's even like between 5'11", 6'1", if they stand up straight, they're going to hit their head on the nails poking through the floor. And there's none of that.
This case just showed me that,
because they came in the dark. Just to be very clear.
That's right. And this case showed me that not only from the law enforcement portion of it, but just like you said, the client people. I had, again, this beautiful idea that when people get this case that falls in front of them, they're hired to do this job, that they look through the notes, the case files, they understand what's going on. But I'm also finding that that's not happening all the time. That people are hired with prosecution, defense, whatever, and it's just, it stays closed. They're not going through it. They're not reading it. So that was something that I learned, and it was very obvious in this case. You
hit the nail exactly on the head. And this is where I want to close it. Most people don't read the case. And that's the thing that I've learned in my career, is most people aren't reading the case. So there are 4 areas we look at when we're looking at staging. One is the law enforcement response. We're looking at witnesses. We're looking at the offender's attempts. And we're looking at the way that things are presented in court. All these areas are places where the crime scene can be curated and staged. Your closing thoughts?
Don't have any.
Read the file is the resounding. Read the file. Actually do the examination, right? Before you can't make the determination until you've read the file and done the determination. Exactly.
That still leaves me speechless that people weren't reading the file. I thought that probably was the first thing you would do when you are hired to look at a case, is read it.
All right. Thank you so much. You can find us on Spotify and other places where these are found. And Melanie, your insights this week on point. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take us out.